Arizona is sinking. Beneath the farms, the suburbs, the highways, the ground is compacting and collapsing, and it will never recover. 10 aquifers are permanently losing the ability to store water. This is not a warning about the future. It is already happening. At number 10, we have the Willcox Basin in southeastern Arizona. For decades, farmers here have pumped groundwater to grow corn and grass hay. The extraction rates have never come close to matching how fast water naturally returns to the ground. Underground sediments act like a sponge. When water is removed faster than it is replaced, the grains above compact under the weight of the land. That compaction does not reverse. The Willcox Aquifer is physically shrinking, and that lost volume is gone for good. The Arizona Department of Water Resources has documented measurable subsidence in the basin. GPS monitoring stations have confirmed the ground surface is dropping. This is not a projection based on models. Real sensors are recording real movement downward in real time. What separates Willcox from some other Arizona basins is that it sits outside the state's strongest regulatory framework. It is not a designated active management area. That designation carries enforceable pumping limits. Without it, the state's hands are largely tied. What fills the gap left by enforceable regulation is voluntary conservation. Farmers are asked to reduce pumping on their own. In a region where groundwater is the only reliable water source and livelihoods depend on it completely, voluntary measures have obvious limits. The deeper clay layers within the basin are the real problem. Clay compacts easily when water pressure drops, and it does not spring back. Every gallon pulled from those layers permanently reduces the total amount of water the basin can hold in the future. Willcox is a basin where the regulatory gap and the geological reality are working against each other at the same time. The ground is dropping, the storage is shrinking, and the tools to stop it are not fully in place. Number 9 is even more complicated. Coming in at number 9 is the Douglas Basin along the US-Mexico border in southeastern Arizona. This aquifer does not belong to one state or one country. It is a shared transboundary system that both Arizona and the Mexican state of Sonora depend on. Agricultural pumping on both sides of the border has drawn water levels down significantly over the years. Subsidence has been observed in and around the city of Douglas. The ground is sinking on the American side, and the Mexican side faces the same underground pressure. Groundwater does not stop moving at a border fence. Water flows through sediment based on pressure and geology, not political lines. What gets pumped in Sonora affects water levels in Arizona. What Arizona pulls out affects communities south of the line. They are one system. Coordinating groundwater management between two countries adds a layer of difficulty that does not exist anywhere else on this list. Environmental agreements between the US and Mexico exist, but enforcing shared aquifer conservation requires cooperation across different legal systems and different agricultural economies. The deeper clay layers in the Douglas Basin are compacting in ways that cannot be undone. Storage capacity that existed in those layers 50 years ago is simply gone. The basin cannot hold as much water as it once could, and that ceiling keeps getting lower. Monitoring data has confirmed that portions of the basin are actively subsiding. The ground surface is moving downward as underground sediments consolidate. This is the visible signal of an invisible process that has been building for decades beneath a border that divides two nations but not one aquifer. Douglas is a situation where geology ignores politics entirely. Two countries share a problem that neither can solve alone. Number 8 brings us back inside Arizona's borders, where a different kind of surface damage is starting to show up above ground. At number 8 is the Safford Basin in Graham County, sometimes called the Upper San Simon area. Here, groundwater depletion has been driven by a mix of agricultural irrigation and municipal use. The aquifer contains fine-grained sediment layers, especially clays, that are highly vulnerable to compaction. Once clay layers compress under reduced water pressure, they lose their ability to store water permanently. This is not a slow degradation that can be partially reversed with the right management approach. The structure of the sediment changes at a microscopic level and stays that way. The Safford Basin has produced something that makes the underground problem impossible to ignore above ground: earth fissures. These are cracks in the land surface that open up as a direct result of what is happening in the sediment layers below. They are dramatic and they are dangerous. Earth fissures can extend for significant distances across the landscape. They cut through roads, run beneath pipelines, and open under building foundations. What begins as an invisible aquifer problem becomes a very visible public safety issue once those cracks start appearing at the surface. The Arizona Geological Survey has mapped fissure activity in the Safford area as an ongoing monitoring priority. That means surveyors are actively tracking where new cracks are forming and how existing ones are growing. The fact that this requires ongoing monitoring tells you the problem is not static. Fissures are not cosmetic damage. They redirect surface water drainage, they undermine roadbeds, and they create liability problems for anyone whose property sits across one. In the Safford Basin, the aquifer collapse and the surface damage are two parts of the same accelerating process. The Safford Basin shows what happens when a groundwater problem graduates from something you measure in wells to something you can see opening in the ground beneath your feet. Number 7 takes us to a completely different part of Arizona, where isolation has made oversight even harder. Number 7 is the Walapai Valley Basin in Mojave County in northwestern Arizona. This basin serves a growing rural population and a small but expanding agricultural sector. Groundwater is not just the primary water source here. It is the only reliable water source the valley has. Natural recharge in the Hualapai Valley is essentially not keeping pace with extraction. Water is being pulled out significantly faster than rain and snowmelt can replace it. That imbalance has been in place for long enough that water table declines have been formally documented. As water levels fall in an unconfined aquifer like this one, the sediment above starts to settle. There is no longer the upward pressure of water holding the grains in place. The structure compacts under gravity, and the land surface above it begins to drop incrementally. The remoteness of the Walapai Valley has historically meant less regulatory attention. Monitoring infrastructure costs money and requires personnel to maintain. In a sparsely populated rural basin far from the state's major population centers, that infrastructure has lagged behind what exists in places like Phoenix or Tucson. The basin does not fall under the jurisdiction of an active management area. That means the strongest tools Arizona law provides for controlling pumping are not available here. Growth in the area is adding more demand to a system that is already running a water deficit. The Walapai Valley Basin is what happens when geography and regulatory gaps combine in a place where alternatives to groundwater simply do not exist. Number 6 takes us to a basin whose collapse helped change Arizona law forever, though not before enormous damage was done. Coming in at number 6 is the Harquahala Plain west of Phoenix. This was once a major cotton farming region that pumped extraordinary volumes of groundwater through the middle decades of the 20th century. The scale of that pumping is difficult to fully appreciate from a modern vantage point. The aquifer beneath the Harquahala Plain was so severely depleted that it became one of the early cautionary examples driving Arizona toward reform. The damage done here contributed directly to the political pressure that produced Arizona's landmark 1980 Groundwater Management Act. The plain paid the price for that lesson. Land subsidence in the Harquahala area has been documented through historical surveys and through satellite radar measurements known as INSAR. INSAR technology can detect millimeter-scale changes in ground elevation from orbit. When researchers pointed it at the Harquahala Plain, what they found was not subtle. Some areas of the plain dropped by several feet over the course of decades. The land surface physically descended as the clay layers beneath it collapsed. This happened across a broad area, not just at isolated points. The scale of the subsidence here is regional. Active farming in the Harquahala Basin has declined significantly since its peak. The economics shifted. The water got too expensive to pull up from increasingly deep levels, and the policy environment changed. But the aquifer does not recover just because pumping slows. The clay layers that collapsed will not re-expand. The Harquahala Plain is a basin where the damage was done, the lesson was learned, and the law was changed. But the aquifer still reflects every gallon that was pulled out of it during those peak decades. The storage that existed then is permanently gone. Number 5 is still actively managed today. At number 5 we have the Tucson Active Management Area, with a focus on Avro Valley to the west of the city. Tucson has been under intensive groundwater management since the 1980s, and it has made genuine progress. But that progress did not undo what happened before the rules existed. Avro Valley experienced significant subsidence and earth fissure development during decades of heavy agricultural pumping that predated modern regulations. By the time those regulations arrived, the sediment damage was already done. The fissures that formed during those peak pumping years did not close when the pumping slowed. The Arizona Geological Survey has documented numerous fissures in Aquifer Valley. Some of those fissures have grown long enough and wide enough to pose direct risks to infrastructure. Roads, pipelines, and drainage systems all become vulnerable when the ground beneath them is splitting along subsidence-driven fracture lines. Tucson has made a significant strategic shift by switching much of its supply to Colorado River water delivered through the Central Arizona Project. It has also invested in actively recharging the aquifer with treated water, injecting supply back underground to help stabilize water pressure in the system. These are real, meaningful interventions. Tucson's approach is frequently cited as a model for how cities can reduce aquifer stress. Water levels in parts of the basin have stabilized, and in some areas have even risen. That is a genuine achievement that took decades of coordinated policy. But stabilizing water pressure does not reverse the physical compaction of sediments that occurred during the peak pumping era. Refilling a clay layer with water does not re-expand it. The pores close permanently. The Tucson Basin's total storage capacity is reduced, and that reduction is not recoverable. Aquifer Valley shows that even a success story in groundwater management carries permanent losses. Tucson did many things right, and the basin still has fissures from past damage cutting across its landscape. Number 4 takes us to a place where the measurements themselves became historic. Number 4 is the Luke area, and the West Salt River Valley in the western reaches of the Phoenix metro region. This area surrounding Luke Air Force Base has been one of the most intensively studied subsidence zones in the entire United States. The numbers recorded here are extraordinary. Decades of agricultural irrigation in the West Valley drew the aquifer down dramatically before the Central Arizona Project began supplementing surface water supplies in the area. By the time the pressure on the aquifer started easing, the sediment damage had already been compounding for most of the 20th century. Subsidence in this area has been measured at more than 18 feet in some locations. 18 feet of ground surface loss. That is among the largest cumulative land surface drops recorded anywhere in the American Southwest. The benchmark monuments that track this movement tell a history written entirely in downward movement. Earth fissures in the Luke area, and nearby communities like Surprise and El Mirage have cracked building foundations, broken utility lines, and created persistent drainage problems across the landscape. These are not isolated incidents. They are recurring consequences of an aquifer system that was drawn down too far. Satellite INSAR data collected by researchers continues to show ongoing subsidence in portions of the area even today. That ongoing movement is not from current pumping alone. Deep clay layers are still slowly responding to water level changes that happened years or even decades ago. The ground has not finished settling. This delayed compaction is one of the more unsettling aspects of subsidence science. The pumping that caused it may have slowed significantly, but the sediment is still catching up to conditions that were set in motion long ago. The land is still moving because of decisions made a generation back. The Luke area and West Salt River Valley represent a zone where the record books were broken, and where the ground is still responding to history. Number 3 sits directly beneath some of the fastest growing suburbs in the entire country, and the fissures there are still actively expanding. Coming in at number 3 is the East Salt River Valley, covering communities like Chandler, Gilbert, and Mesa in the eastern Phoenix metro area. Beneath the rapid suburban growth of the past several decades lies an aquifer system that has been under stress since large-scale farming began there in the early 1900s. Subsidence in the East Valley has been documented in Chandler, Gilbert, and Mesa, with some areas having dropped by more than a foot over multi-decade periods. A foot of ground surface loss sounds modest until you consider what was built on top of that ground, assuming it would stay level. Earth fissures have appeared across the East Valley, and some of them extend for miles. These are not hairline cracks. Some fissures are wide enough and deep enough to be genuine hazards, and they cross beneath neighborhoods, under roads, and in some cases beneath canals that carry water supply infrastructure. The Arizona Geological Survey actively maps East Valley fissures and updates its database as new cracks emerge. The fact that the database requires regular updating tells you these features are not historical artifacts. New fissures are still forming as the sediment below continues adjusting to conditions in the aquifer. The delivery of Colorado River water through the Central Arizona Project canal system has helped stabilize water levels in parts of the East Valley Basin. In some areas where recharge has been most effective, the aquifer has responded positively. That is a real improvement over where things stood decades ago. But the compaction that already occurred in clay-rich sediment layers across the East Valley is a permanent loss. Water levels improving does not re-expand those layers. The basin holds less water than it did before farming began here. That capacity reduction is baked into the geology now. The East Valley is a place where suburban growth and aquifer collapse have been happening simultaneously for over a century. Number 2 takes us to a basin where the subsidence numbers are so large they are hard to put into context until you see them next to a building. At number 2 is the area around Eloy and Picacho in Pinal County near the center of the state. This corridor has experienced some of the most dramatic and thoroughly documented land subsidence in Arizona's entire recorded history. Cotton farming drove the damage here, and the scale of it is staggering. Portions of the Eloy area subsided by more than 12 feet between the 1950s and the early 2000s. 12 feet of permanent ground loss in roughly 50 years. That places Eloy among the most severely affected basins in the state and among the most extreme subsidence cases documented in the American West. Earth fissures in Pinal County have grown to extraordinary lengths. Some individual fissures have been mapped at several miles long. These are not cracks you step over. They are features that redirect drainage patterns, cut through property lines, and force infrastructure engineers to redesign roads and canals around them. Differential subsidence is what happens when the ground sinks unevenly across an area. One side of a canal or highway drops faster than another. The structure above it was designed assuming flat, stable ground. When that assumption proves wrong, the repairs become expensive, and the problems keep coming back. The arrival of Colorado River water through the Central Arizona Project has reduced but not eliminated pumping stress in the Eloy and Picacho Basin. Groundwater withdrawals are lower than they were at peak cotton farming, but the compaction already locked into the sediment column will continue manifesting slowly for years to come. Eloy is a basin where the most dramatic period of damage is documented so precisely that researchers use it as a reference point for subsidence studies nationwide. The measurements here helped build the scientific understanding of how aquifer collapse works. The basin itself paid the price for that data. Number 2 shows what a mid-century agricultural economy can do to geology, when the only limit on pumping is economics. Number 1 is bigger in every dimension. More history, more pumping, more subsidence, more people living on top of it right now. Number 1 is the Phoenix Active Management Area, specifically the central and western portions of the Phoenix Basin. This is the largest and most complex groundwater management zone in Arizona, and it sits atop an aquifer system that has been under stress for more than 100 years. The Phoenix Basin's documented history of land subsidence goes back to the mid-20th century, making it one of the longest continuous subsidence records for any urban basin in the United States. Agricultural, industrial, and municipal pumping have all contributed across different eras, layering damage on top of damage over generations. Some areas within the greater Phoenix Basin have subsided by more than 18 feet cumulatively. 18 feet of permanent ground surface loss beneath a metropolitan area of millions of people. Infrastructure that was built assuming stable ground is now sitting on land that has fundamentally changed its elevation. The Arizona Department of Water Resources and the U.S. Geological Survey have operated an extensive monitoring network in the Phoenix Basin for decades. Monitoring wells, elevation benchmarks, and satellite measurements give researchers one of the most comprehensive subsidence datasets available for any basin in the American West. The data is rich, and it is sobering. Earth fissures in the Phoenix Active Management Area have damaged homes, severed water lines, cut gas lines, and created ongoing liability problems for property owners and local governments. These are not edge case events in rural areas. They are occurring within and around one of the country's largest and fastest growing cities. Phoenix has invested heavily in aquifer storage and recovery programs. During wet years, when Colorado River water is available in surplus, the city intentionally injects that water underground. The stored water can then be recovered during dry years. It is a sophisticated strategy, and it has genuinely helped stabilize parts of the basin. But aquifer storage and recovery programs replenish water pressure. They do not reverse the physical compaction of clay layers that collapsed when water was originally removed. Injecting water back into a compressed clay layer does not re-expand it. The pore space that closed is gone. The structure does not return. Phoenix is a city that has done more than almost any other in the American West to actively manage its water future. The investment in infrastructure, monitoring, and recharge programs is real, and it has made a measurable difference. And yet, the ground beneath the city has still permanently changed in ways that cannot be undone. 10 basins, 100 years of pumping, ground that has dropped by feet in places where millions of people now live and work. The clay layers that collapsed are not coming back. The storage capacity that was lost will not return. The ground that is already sunk will not rise again.